Sara Carter is with us, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor, and she has some new information about all of this. Great column again by Byron York on all these people. We were talking to Carter Page earlier. Sara, how are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thank you. How are you? Hope you had a great weekend.
I did, thank you. And just to go, these were spies. The idea that they're trying to say these are just informants, it's not true.
Well, and it also appears that, based on the information that we hear coming out, based on the conversations that Byron York, as well as I have had with Carter Page, as well as other reporters have had with Sam Clovis, and stories that have come out with George Papadopoulos, the more information we're hearing and the more we're seeing, it goes beyond the idea of even spy or informant. I mean, there are some serious allegations here that there was possibly influence by these people to kind of set up these situations, these scenarios. Now, I know this is still being investigated by the House Intelligence Committee, and remember, Sean, the House Intelligence Committee is still waiting for documents that the DOJ and the FBI are refusing to turn over on how investigation started. But as we see now, based on the timelines, it doesn't appear that this investigation really started in the summer of 2016. It appears to have started much earlier in the early spring of 2016. And a lot of this information that we're hearing now kind of points in that direction. It also brings into account some of the people that were involved in this in London.
All right, let's go and go through the timeline. Andy McCarthy really tore this up. This really was a two-part effort, and part A was the exoneration of Hillary Clinton, and I don't think we can put enough emphasis on this, that this was never a real investigation, that the fix had always been in here, and the very same people that were involved in that investigation and exoneration of Hillary were the same people that ended up, going 2 days later over to Great Britain to start this whole investigation into Russia collusion, even though we now know it started literally in the spring, did it not, of 2016?
Yeah, it appears that it did start in the spring of 2016. At least that's when they all became aware of what they had. And what I mean is those people, former FBI Director James Comey, who was fired, Andrew McCabe, who was fired. So what happened was on March 21st, 2016, that's when then candidate Donald Trump announced to the Washington Post his foreign policy team, the team that was working with him. He named off Carter Page. He also named off George Papadopoulos. And believe it or not, at the time, George Papadopoulos, who's a young guy who really didn't have a lot of experience, both he and Carter Page were volunteering at the behest of Sam Clovis. George Papadopoulos was actually working in London at the time. And what's really interesting is that even before Donald Trump made that announcement, this professor, Joseph Misford, who was connected to the Russians, had already, but not just to the Russians. Remember, this professor was also connected to former members of the CIA. He was also connected to British intelligence. On March 14th, he met with George Papadopoulos in Italy and became very interested in him. This is where everything gets kind of fuzzy. Like, where did it all start? Right now we're seeing that March 21st was significant because that's when Comey went to Loretta Lynch right after Donald Trump made that announcement, and he and McCabe actually briefed Loretta Lynch about Carter Page being on there. We know this. How? Because the House Intelligence Committee report talks about this. And shortly after Comey and McCabe brief Loretta Lynch, they then go to the National Security Council meeting. This is the meeting with all the principals. And who are the principals? Samantha Power from the UN, John Brennan from the CIA, all the top officials. So this is still in March. This is still in March of 2016 and early April. Now, they brief them, but they decide at the briefing, both at the one with Lynch and apparently at the one with the principals, that they're not going to give this defensive briefing to President Trump to stress any concerns they have about Carter Page being on his team. What's even more unusual, Sean, even more unusual than that, is that Carter Page actually helped the FBI in a previous case put away some Russians
if they were worried,
in the United States.
If they were worried about Carter Page, why didn't they go to the Trump campaign and say, hey, guys, I want you to be aware of for your own safety and security that there might be somebody we need to keep an eye on and that we're investigating. That, to me, would be the proper protocol, but instead it seemed like they saw an opportunity to weaponize somebody that had even worked for them in the past, apparently.
Absolutely. And that is a huge question because I have talked to a number of people within the FBI, former and current, as well as people within the intelligence community. And that is protocol. If there is any question about somebody approaching a presidential candidate, whether that be Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, whether it be in the past Marco Rubio or anybody else, whether that person, if that person is connected to the Russians or some other state actor that is a concern for the United States, then absolutely, by protocol, they have to give a defensive briefing. And in this case, they gave none. But instead, what we find out is that April, right after all of these discussions take place, we know for a fact that in April, Fusion GPS is hired by Perkins Coie to go after Trump and possible Russia connections. That's when Fusion GPS also hires ex-British spy Christopher Steele to put together this dossier. And that is paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. I don't believe in coincidences.
I don't believe in coincidence either. All right, let's go to Andy McCarthy's timeline, and I think this is very, very interesting and troubling. Now, Ted Cruz had just dropped out of the race, and it became unbelievable to the likes of Strzok and Page that Trump was going to be the Republican nominee and that he'd be squaring off against Hillary. And I think what's so interesting about what his piece shows here, because they were both stunned, and as Andy says, that the only words we needed to know that reflected the mindset of the agency's leadership, because they were in leadership, now the pressure really starts to finish MYE, the mid-year exam, which was the code word the FBI had given to the Hillary Clinton email probe. And both of them agreed that that was really, really important. And this was the top brass of the FBI. And remember, Trump was to them somebody they didn't think could win. That's why they talked about maybe an insurance policy. But, you know, the real reality is that these investigations can't be compartmentalized because the FBI saw them as an inseparable link, as Andy pointed out. You know, Trump's victory in the primaries, the opening his path to the Oval Office, meant that Hillary's case needed to be brought to a close, and then later that led to, you know, Operation Crossfire Hurricane.
That's right. You couldn't really separate one from the other, right? At the time, especially if you're looking at the leadership and considering the fact that Peter Strzok, who was head of the Russia desk at the time, was looking into both of these cases and how they intertwined with each other was critically important because you see that the criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton, that gets dropped. That gets pushed away. Comey made sure of that. So did the FBI. They're no longer going to, the case closed. She wasn't intending to do to create any malice. There was no real gross negligence here. But as soon as Trump becomes the candidate, everything goes into high gear. Why? Because they believed at the time that Hillary would take this and this would be sweeping. Now they become, and this is according to sources that I've spoken with also, kind of a state of panic, right? They have to get things taken care of. They have to ensure that Hillary does win. And a lot of the sources that I spoke to, a lot of former FBI senior law enforcement officials that understood how these operations work, that understand how things are meant to play out, and they saw all the flaws in that investigation into Hillary Clinton, said, boy, oh boy, they must have been terrified. That means everyone, that this would start to unravel.
All right, stay right there. We'll take a break. We'll come back. More with Sara Carter on the other side. All right, as we continue, Sara Carter, investigative reporter and Fox News contributor. All right, what about these recent reports scattered across social media that this testimony of this FBI special agent, you know, we got reports that Trey Gowdy and others and Bob Goodlatte have at least 3 or 4 FBI special agents that were involved in all of this regarding the Clinton email investigation, and they want to testify after the IG report comes out about how bad the fix was in for Hillary. To me, that's going to be the blockbuster testimony.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to look forward to when it comes to that testimony. I know for certain that one of the FBI special agents, who's still a current FBI special agent, according to my sources, is willing to provide testimony, direct testimony in relation to his work with Peter Strzok and the interviews that they conducted with Flynn and any of the circumstances surrounding that. Now, remember, Sean, what's really important here is that if they're current agents, that means they're not retired, and they're going to be providing testimony, they have to be subpoenaed to a large extent, and they have to be subpoenaed directly. That means we don't subpoena them through the FBI. We don't let the FBI sit on their subpoenas. You subpoena these FBI agents directly. Subpoena them at their homes. Tell them that you need them to show on a certain date, and make that testimony public. At first I was thinking, talking to a number of agents, there was a lot of back and forth between whether or not it should be made public or whether or not it should be kept behind closed doors, the testimony. Now that I've been speaking to a number of retired law enforcement officials and current law enforcement officials, they say, no, this has to go public now, regardless. But those subpoenas have to come in because, the dangerous situation that a lot of these FBI agents put themselves in, especially if they're currently working, if they walk over, to the House Intelligence Committee or reach out to the Senate Judiciary Committee, they could get into a lot of trouble with the Bureau. So the only way to protect these agents as best as they can is to subpoena them, and I don't know why they have not done so yet. I think that's very important. The House Intelligence Committee as well as the Senate Judiciary Committee has had some of these names for some time. Subpoena these agents, get their testimony, make it public, let the American people know what's going on.
Yeah, well said. All right, Sarah Carter, we appreciate you being with us.